Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TBR's Software Business Quarterly Review, in which our senior software analyst will walk you through the results of TBR's software vendor reports and software business benchmark report, providing you with additional insight on the state of the market. I'm Allison Crawford, and I'm hosting today's webinar. As you know, the enterprise software market continues to evolve as both IT and line of business customers invest in software to change their businesses. Customers' expectations are increasing, requiring seamless integration of horizontal functions such as HR, finance and accounting, and supply chain solutions from leading vendors such as Oracle, SAP, and Microsoft. These demands are altering the landscape in which you compete, and Elizabeth Hedstrom-Heinlein will share her opinions on why these changes are picking up speed and what they'll mean for your business over the coming quarters. Before I pass this over to Elizabeth, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First, we're recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others that we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. Elizabeth will address them at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out to either directly to her or I at the end of the webinar to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find the slides as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight. And we'll share these social media links with you again at the end of the presentation. Many of you already know our senior analyst covering enterprise software, Elizabeth Hedstrom-Heinlein. Since joining TBR from EMC 3 years ago, Elizabeth has been working closely with the largest software vendors to understand their business models and strategies. Her expertise and perspective is guiding our software clients on their marketing messaging, product positioning, and corporate strategy. And we have a special guest here today from our cloud practice and services practice, Ramunis Farkas, who will be on hand to ask any additional questions that you may have on that market. So with that, let me hand this over to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Allison. So for those of you who've joined us before, we're following a similar flow to last quarter in that we're going to take you all through the current market state of the enterprise software landscape with a particular eye to some vendor-specific insights around lines of business, those being applications, software technology, and systems management. And then from there, what's coming next that we see in the market in 2014? Obviously, we're already through the first calendar quarter, and we're already starting to see some results from folks like Oracle coming in as well as Red Hat. But where we think the market is going, especially around buyer behavior in the middle to back half of this year, we'll take you through some leading vendor best practices and how they are already trying to get ahead of these pressing trends around line of business buyers and user experience and solutions integration. So with that, taking a look at the overall enterprise software market, when we looked at fourth quarter, it was a solid close for a lot of folks. And I want to orient you to the graph quickly. What we're looking at on the vertical axis is the average annual revenue growth of the vendor's software businesses. So keeping that in mind, we have excluded hardware revenue from folks like IBM and Oracle, as well as devices revenue from Microsoft. Now, this is inclusive of the cloud business, so you do see some subscription folks in this mix as well, like Salesforce and NetSuite, as you can see there. And then on the horizontal axis, you're looking at quarterly corporate revenue growth, again, around the software and services businesses. And when we look at the leaders in this space, I think the fascinating call-out is that the players that have a very clear but very defined approach to their market are the ones that are really getting ahead of the average. I think Microsoft, candidly, is really coasting on a lot of the early momentum from Satya Nadella's appointment as CEO finally being announced. It's amazing what happens when a vendor is perceived to move out of neutral, because I think since Ballmer's announced departure, they've been spinning their wheels, and that's not a good thing, especially when you tend to rely on your partners for revenue and growth as much as Microsoft does. VMware is really starting to coalesce its software-defined data center story into a very real point of product-led reality. And that's where you see products like vSAN come into focus as what makes this vision of the next wave of virtualization actually something quantifiable and not just a company reaching out for its next big idea. And then the targeted players like Informatica, Red Hat, and Commvault, those companies that are really looking at how do we manage our way into deeper relevance inside of a company's data center. For Informatica in particular, and Dell Software, you look at folks that are really starting to say, how do we take our management and orchestration strengths and tie them to new adjacent addressable markets? A land and expand strategy that Red Hat has been really looking at monetizing over the last 12 months. And the stakes are high for vendors to really make this a reality, because when you take a look at the ongoing impact of cloud, the candidly irrevocable impact of cloud in this market, vendors have to find a way, especially those that are as wedded to on-premise sales as Oracle, IBM, SAP, I'll call out HP Software as well. They have to find a way to transform their core portfolios, whether it's transform them into cloud-delivered offerings or transform the way they sell them in such a way that they are anticipating and taking growth from other vendors. Because at this point, that's how you really get beyond revenue growth and into sustained profitability. And it's that sustained profitability that's going to give them the time and the room that they need to make the investments necessary to grow to the next step of their own corporate evolution. Taking now a deeper look at the quarter itself. We talked about pivoting core offerings to suites, looking at solutions that are going to make it easier for customers to buy and deploy. And this is where you see, again, Informatica leading the way with folks like Commvault and Tableau. How do you take a point product and make it a resonant, vibrant solution that has impact in multiple areas across a customer's data center? Tableau starts with the idea of of data visualization as their core value proposition, and creates Tableau Server, which can integrate not only with targeted BI deployments, but work backwards into customers' business applications. Heterogeneous integration, simple deployment, easy to buy. Commvault is a company, I like to think of them as a little company that could. They're very proud of the fact that they stick with Simpana, they've stuck with Simpana, and the recent refresh of Simpana just on this growth, just on these growth rates alone shows that, well, guess what, folks? As business intelligence is driving revenue from big data, you're going to have to back it up with somebody. And staying tied to what you do best, being a backup expert, has really positioned Commvault to come back into its own for the first time, I think, really since the heyday of backup and deduplication in 2009 in the midst of the data domain acquisition by first NetApp and then EMC. We talked about Informatica. Again, data management, I think, is really the next wave of business intelligence software sales. How do you take those deployments, which can be isolated across a customer's environment, and really integrate them in a seamless way to make things easy for customers? Now, taking a look down at the improving and laggard quadrants, I want to make a point that this is a relative view. The average lines that you see there, the green average lines, really are, those are the averages in terms of the vendors that are covered in this benchmark. And a big takeaway for us from last quarter to this quarter is that the average really moved away from the axis for the first time in a couple of quarters. So this was a good close to the year for a lot of people, including folks like TIBCO, who relative to a lot of their BI competitors may be lagging, but relative to the broader applications landscape, finally managed to move away from the center of the grid. When you look at companies like HP Software, Actuate, Sage, CA, these are the companies that I think are still trying to figure out what their story for 2014 is. And I think HP Software of all of them is probably furthest along in really placing its bets on business intelligence and understanding that they have a broader go-to-market that they can leverage to drive growth not only in the software business, but across the board. But I think the battle for the year, you know, it's amazing when people tell me that the cloud is going to kill enterprise software. I have to laugh, because when you look at just how much of the world's data is tied up in applications being delivered by SAP, Microsoft, IBM, Oracle, never mind when you throw the databases into the mix. Enterprise software isn't going anywhere, folks. what is going to really make the difference in terms of which vendors move into the leading quadrant of the average rather than the slipping and lagging quadrant is who is taking control of their own destiny. Which vendors are really looking at how do we change how we do business so that we set the terms of how we grow and how we evolve rather than having our customers dictate what's coming next. And that's where we go back to the profitability story. When we look at, again, the graph here, corporate operating margin for the software and services business on the horizontal axis, vertical axis, corporate software and service revenue growth. Everybody is really managing to monetize the investments that they made across the year. Again, the averages really came away from the single digits this year. We saw a lot of people really moving the growth needle on revenue growth, and some of that really came from, I think, how do you, in the near term, manage services growth to deal with evolving portfolios. We've seen this time and time again, and Ramonis will definitely chime in here as well. As the software vendors reinvent their portfolios, especially folks like SAP and Oracle, you see a near-term uptick in their own professional services activity and to a degree their own professional services revenue, because they've got to figure out how to make it all work before they then reach out to their partners, which our professional services team covers on a regular basis, folks like Accenture, even the HP services arm, IBM Global Services, and create those best practices for them to take to market. So
I think that what's also interesting is that as the profitability is shifting, I mean, part of that profitability is that many of these vendors are looking at, as-a-service offerings, which also contribute to the profit, and yet supporting that kind of business is also not as labor-intensive as providing the support and providing the services on-site for every one of the vendors. So it's a much more profitable model in the long term. Certainly the revenue growth is not maybe occurring as quickly as one would anticipate, but the profit margins are much higher on everything that's as a service related to the actual products that are being sold on a subscription basis or the services provided along with that as a service product.
Exactly, and I think that's where we really start to see the line of business story now coming into focus. The leading edge of margin growth remains the applications and database vendors. You look at the wave of Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, IBM, and EMC on the rise. These vendors really have a very strong understanding of what they do best, and they're continuing to take their core products more to a packaged solution offering. I think if I threw my dart at the board, I would say that by the end of calendar 15, early 2016, you're going to start to see the application and the database layer really starting to come together. Whether that's marketing speak or actual development remains to be seen based on who's investing where this year. And then, so that when you look at the applications vendors, these are the ones that are really able to say, I can help you understand your data better, and that's where business intelligence comes in as the leading focus of applications activity for this year. When you look at the technology vendors, it's how do you make your part of the software stack the most resonant, relevant component of not only your own portfolio, but your partner's portfolio and your partner's clouds. And that's where you see the Oracle Database as a Service offering coming in, as well as IBM's recent acquisitions around launching its own database as a service offering, and the rapid growth of the SAP HANA platform as an opportunity for developers and outreach. But then the bigger takeaway from following that is what happens in systems management. And I think when we look at systems management, it's a bit of a catch-all, but I think the big markets in systems management, as you see the vendors we cover, management and orchestration, virtualization and virtualization management, information management, and backup, recovery, archive, GRC, and then finally security. So those big buckets of how do you protect your data, how do you ensure and insure your data, how do you manage your data, and how do you drive efficiency in how your data is being run. And those vendors are really now all starting to crowd up to the average, because everybody now, when you're talking about the customers, we hear from customers often that big data is complex. My environment is complex. The heterogeneity, the search for a heterogeneous tool that can manage everything simply and easily, it's still there, it's still important, but now it's getting even more complicated by the fact that now you've got a lot of line of business owners looking over the shoulders of IT who also need to understand it in a way that makes sense for them. So I think IT's struggle continues to be more, how do you stay more valuable and more relevant, not less, and how do you use the tools that you already have and the investments that you're being given, which are better than they've been in years past, but by no means are they what they were even 3 years ago, let alone 5 years ago. And when you're spending $1, how do you get $5 of return from it in such a way that it adds value to the business, not just cost to the infrastructure? And that's where we get to our market outlook for 2014. We see a rising focus on the channel in the first half of this year as the critical step for a lot of vendors in this market. How do you get the velocity up in the first half of the year to really make sure that you're then set to drive more nuanced growth in the second half of the year? You've recruited your partners, you've retained your partners, candidly, you've protected them from threat from other vendors, and then you look to your 3 points of growth. How do you reach out to the line of business users? How do you simplify the end user experience? And how do you create solutions while streamlining your own execution as a path to growth? And the line of business story is really an application story. And the application story, I think, hinges for those vendors on how do we satisfy a very demanding buyer base. Customers are now, it's a buyer's market. It's been a buyer's market for 18 to 24 months. It's going to be for at least the next 24 months, in my opinion. Pardon me. Because especially when you look at the disruptive impact of cloud vendors in this market, they're embedding horizontal functionality across these applications rapidly, and they're constantly updating it. So customers now expect HR, finance, accounting, and supply chain functionality to be integrated into, standard with, and also integral to your core ERP, your core CRM applications. They really want these integrated suites. And that, I think, is a big challenge and opportunity for folks like Oracle and SAP and Microsoft, is where is their next act? Where is their big evolution? And we're seeing a lot of those vendors take a solid look at industry applications as a way to keep their own customers happy and buying over time. And when we take a look at a couple of the vendors we called out here, it's how do you keep the portfolio simple and keep the functionality robust? And that's a very delicate balancing act for any vendor in this space to walk, because it's having your cake and eating it too, honestly. But targeted acquisitions like the acquisition of Texan and 3Q really have positioned SAP to take not only the Infinite Insight product to market, which they had back on the street within, I think, about 60 days of the acquisition being closed, and I think that's even an overestimate. But they've now already focused on integrations with SAP HANA and SAP Lumira, key business intelligence and database offerings that are going to position predictive analytics to be spread throughout the SAP core application suite. When we look at HP Haven, it's a bit of a misnomer in that it is a platform here, but what's really driving the value of it that we see is the software that came in from Vertica. So HP is telling a solution story from its own differentiated position of converged infrastructure, and candidly, this is how they take a whack at Oracle, who's also trying to do its own best narrative around the converged infrastructure story. How do they take back some of the market that they used to really own and dominate, particularly in the channel? HP still has a lot of trust in the channel that I think many vendors are trying to get themselves, and Haven is really their first whack since Meg's, I think, reinvention initiatives came into focus, that has a product tied to a clear, simple value proposition that not only can HP sell itself, but its channel partners can sell easily and without cannibalizing each other's prospects. So from the bosses to the line employees, how do you simplify the end user experience to make it easy for IT to engage, enroll, and empower the line of business user? And especially for folks like VMware and a lot of the infrastructure players, this, I think, really becomes the critical step for them, because VMware, I'll stop on them for a second. VMware is that vendor that has always gotten away with playing like a startup for a lot longer than it should have. And now under Pat Gelsinger, we're watching a company really mature and come into its own around how do we talk to the C-suite. And that's never been where VMware has been strongest. They've always stayed very close to their technologists. Candidly, it's the technologists that built that company from the ground up. So how do you use the end user experience and the user interface to help your core IT evangelist team up with their line of business bosses? And it's all, again, it's about that vision of being a driver of business value in IT rather than being a cost center. And I think Ramonis and I have heard that story off and on for the better part of a decade, and the story stays the same even though the constituents involved keep changing. So when we look at the next slide, how do you make the UIs intuitive? How do you add high-interest features like can you use it on a mobile phone? Does it drive social collaboration? Can it add additional analytic insights that are readily consumed by not only your analyst but your CEO? Microsoft Dynamics, I think, has always been the forgotten asset in the Microsoft suite. How do you embed Yammer? How do you embed NetBreeze? How do you make Dynamics touch optimized? I think Dynamics has a lot of running room left, and under Satya Nadella, I have to wonder if you're going to start seeing Microsoft take a lot more aggressive swings at some folks that, candidly, they've let run some very disparate markets for a long time. Microsoft, I think, has been very internal in its focus, and it serves them well because they have such market size and market power that they don't have to be first. They can let everybody else figure out what makes the market tick, what makes the market work, and empower those and learn from their mistakes before they make a move into the next market. So I think that Oracle, IBM, SAP should watch out for Dynamics CRM 2013, and I think they should watch out for Microsoft, because I don't expect Satya to really be that guy that's going to let people run these markets unchallenged any longer. Also, I think when you look at SQL Server from the database side, it's an asset that has yet to be fully monetized. Likewise, Hyper-V. Especially when you look at SQL Server tied to Hyper-V, this is a package that Microsoft has been working on for a long time and has had for a long time in-house. Watch out VMware and Citrix, because Microsoft's coming after you. And then if we take a look at the application side, how do you stay, when you're IBM, candidly, you're 5 years ahead of everybody else when you look at the analytics market. So how do you take that next step of technologist evolution while ensuring that you are not moving away from the business-driven value propositions that your current buyers need? And when you adjust the list of what we put up on the screen here, Project Neo, simplified search for data discovery, and initializing the Watson Business Unit, three very distinct, very disparate tactics that let the technologists at IBM keep doing what they do best, while you have executives focused on monetizing leading-edge cognitive computing technology, but not abandoning the core offerings like Cognos to make sure that you keep everybody engaged and enrolled over time. And finally, solutions integration and streamlined execution. And this is one of those that is a little bit of a catch-all for everyone. But it's important to note because you're looking at agility as a path to growth. And a lot of these companies are so big that, and I'll borrow my favorite Larry Ellison quote, and a couple of you on the line have heard me say this before, it takes time to turn a battleship. That applies to a lot of people in this market. So how do you make the first two market outlook tactics that we talked about here, how do you buy yourselves the time to invest in those, make those long-lasting and sticky inside your business? You focus on integrating what you have and selling it quickly. And that's where it's about the solution story. It's about the simple deployment, because simple deployment works for your customers and it works for your partners' customers. And streamlining your own execution means you get to get out of your own way and your ecosystem's way so that everybody's selling in their own space, in their own time, on a faster selling cycle than they've ever done before. Because, like it or not, the refresh cycle of the cloud vendors, 3-4 times a year, fully transparent roadmaps, your customers now expect speed. And they're going to expect it across the board, not just in how you build things, but how you talk to them, how you service them, and how you make it easy and digestible for them to deploy. So when you look at, I think, the two vendors that have some of the most sizable opportunity in this space, they're Oracle and Dell around the software suite. How do you streamline your portfolio and simplify the way that your customers and partners talk to you? Oracle, I think, has one of the most robust BI portfolios in the market, both in terms of what it's built organically as well as what it acquired from Endeca. And then when you look at big data, that tends to be a very system-centric story for them. I think there's a lot of opportunity for Oracle to bring those together, because that's how you keep HP in the box that you put them in, while also really accelerating your own competitive traction against cloud-based Hadoop solutions like AWS Elastic MapReduce. Business intelligence is going to be the story of the year. It's been the story for the last couple of years, but I think it's continuing to come into focus because I said last time we were all on the line together, big data is the new cloud washing. Big data is now starting to finally come into focus, be defined, have a meaningful view of what it means. Data isn't just big, it's complicated. What does that mean for your customers? What does that mean for your partners? So I think that the market around that concept is finally coming together, and that's where Oracle in particular has the ability to bring its portfolio together into an integrated go-to-market, and that's where they defend their own stack and start putting a new tool in their arsenal against SAP. And when we look at Dell, Dell is a completely acquired portfolio in a lot of ways. How does Dell, now that it's private, now that it's got a little bit of breathing room from the market, consolidate that software portfolio in such a way that you can lead with SonicWall, you can lead with Case, you can lead with Wise, you can go with whatever you need at the right time, but do it in such a way that Dell's ability to manage an environment, whether it's its own environment or whether it's business applications from a partner, I'll call out their recent alliance with Oracle as a great example of that. How does Dell's software make a customer's business run better? And that's where you get the foundation built and you position Dell to start pivoting in the back half of the year against growth markets like mobility and cloud. So, looking ahead, the traditional market boundaries are eroding, but that's the key takeaway. They're eroding. They're not going away. There's just some big holes in them that a lot of disruptive players are poking through, and it doesn't take a lot of SAP's install base to make a Tableau really happy. So the market leaders, the folks that have the most revenue in this space are going to tie their core products to line of business value propositions. How do you make your application the most resonant for a customer's business data? How do you make your software technology, your database, and your middleware the most resonant for anyone's stack? And how do you take your systems management offering and have it be the path to efficiency regardless of what your environment looks like? Because from there, that's how you pivot into the cloud. When we look at the concentration of the buyer's market, how do customers get integrated solutions? How do vendors survive these market changes? You come together and create a clear, simple portfolio, narrative, and customer message that drives the revenue growth momentum to create the time you need to integrate into the cloud. And that's where folks like Red Hat, I think we're probably 2 or 3 years ahead of everybody else in saying, we know how to manage. We have a good middleware stack. We're not going to be a cloud player. We're going to be a cloud management player. And they bought the technology they needed at the right time, and now they really have focused on building from their install base, building out so they have a consistent growth model with further penetration into their newer adjacent businesses. They've now got proof points with customers that love what they do, trust in the market, and now they're really positioned to start going after net new customers, and that's where you've seen them really hiring in the last 18 months. So with that, we'll stop here and we'll throw the floor open for questions.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks to those of you who sent questions already. I do encourage, if anyone has any questions, to send them through now. The first question we have, is the cloud going to be the end of enterprise software as a market? You kind of touched on that earlier.
We did, definitely, and I think the answer is it's the next wave of change. I think if you look back at the idea of in-memory a couple of years ago, that was a big change. I think cloud is a big change, but when you think about how a customer's business is being run, you can't just rip that all out. Then all of a sudden you're back 10 years ago when every time you had to refresh your ERP cycle, it took 6 months of shutting your business down to do it. I do think it's probably a much more positive impact on enterprise software than the vendors now might think, as they're in the midst of all the investments and change that are needed to stay ahead of the cloud. Because if you are in that camp of folks that are really trying to own their own destiny, look at IBM's acquisitions, look at SAP's cash-out policy around maintenance, they're the ones that are saying, we are going to set the terms of our own change and growth. And your customers are going to follow you. If you can set a clear vision of where you're going, they'll go with you. I think it's a lack of activity and a lack of dialogue with your own install base that leaves you open to threat.
Yeah, I would also like to add, I think that, we have a situation where you have a licensing model and a subscription model going on in the marketplace. In both cases, you still need software. It's not disappearing off the marketplace. People need workloads executed. How you deliver that software is really the crux of what cloud is changing. But that software and the workloads that need to be executed do not disappear. So the vendors simply have to figure out how they're going to continue to make money at the same way, shape, and form as they did in the past, how they address the marketplace. And if you just sit still, yes, your licensing better revenues will evaporate. You have to morph and change and figure out how to sustain the revenue streams you've had in the past to be a different delivery model.
Exactly.
Okay, the next question we have, looking at the enterprise software players by segment, what surprises do you expect in 2014?
I think it's going to be fascinating. We'll take this in quick chunks. I think for the applications vendors, the company that really figures out how to make an industry-led story replicable. There are needs that are specific by industry. Banking applications are different than healthcare applications. And this goes back a couple of jobs for me at this point, I would argue that some of these problems that applications are solving are functional regardless of industry. And so when we talk about creating agility, I think those applications vendors that figure out how to replicate what's working in one industry, pivot it quickly and apply it to another, are the folks that are going to get out ahead. And so when I look at the battle of the industry titans, this is Smarter Planet versus Oracle's Global Business Units versus SAP's Strategic Industries. And I think that's the big fight for this year, though those three players should also be wary of the business intelligence-centric vendors like SaaS that are also eyeing the industries as their next wave of growth.
But I think there's also, just kind of on the side note, huge competition is going to evolve on the development and the people that are going to develop the various pieces of software for the various vendors. There's going to be a lot of competition going on over the DevOps arena.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have one more question in queue, so if you do have any questions, please send them to now. The next question is, what do you think will happen in M&A over the next 12 to 24 months?
I think business intelligence is still going to be the story for the near term, but I do think that the idea of how do we talk to Hadoop, how do we integrate with Hadoop, is going to be a rising question for the back half of this year into next year. Now, whether that's an M&A story or an alliance story, I think is still coming into focus. Candidly, I think Intel's carrying of Cloudera's Hadoop distribution is going to have seismic impacts on this market for the next 18 months. That's as much of a statement of this is where we're placing our trust by one of the most trusted vendors in the market as you could ever ask for. And I think we have not yet begun to see the impacts of that in the market. I think it's a two-way street. The advanced analytic applications in the beginning of the year, as the M&A story, predictive analytics still top of mind, but how do you then see Hadoop really changing the story in the back half of the year?
Okay, we just had another question come through. That question is, from an infrastructure standpoint, there are a number of proprietary solutions, but more and more movement on OpenStack. What do you see being that answer to keeping integrated suites portable, easy, etc.?
It's a great question, and I think from the customer's perspective, this goes back to it being a buyer's market. I think the movement onto OpenStack, and then when you add in the complicating factors of Cloud Foundry, et cetera, I think it goes to show you that open source has really become a trusted path to infrastructure development. I think that for keeping integrated suites portable and easy, a lot of the vendors in this space are really going to have a seat at a lot of different tables to make sure that they are hedging their bets correctly. I think OpenStack is quickly becoming the you don't get fired for putting it on OpenStack answer. I think it's become enough of the norm that it's a safe bet, but I don't see that market as closed by any means. I think Cloud Foundry is going to, I think Pivotal is following its IPO, if it stays on schedule for the middle of this year that they're promising, I think Pivotal and the broader EMC Federation are going to put a lot of money and a lot of time behind Cloud Foundry to make sure that they can play too.
Yeah, I think the proprietary solution is, no one's come out with one yet that's perfect and addresses everything for everybody. As a consequence, it is a buyer's market. They want the ability to switch, change, move around, pick and choose, and you don't want to be locked in at this stage of the game, especially with so many workloads being pushed into the cloud, so many infrastructure offerings being pushed into the cloud. You do not want to be locked in any way, shape, or form and then have to backtrack out of it.
Exactly.
So we don't have any additional questions in queue. So with that, I don't know if you want to talk to this real quick.
I'll do back one if we could, and then. So for your software contacts here at TBR, again, my contact information is there. Want to introduce Matt Healy, who is our Principal Analyst for Software and Applications, and Christian Perry, who is our Principal Analyst for, within the data center, infrastructure management software. So the three of us together are your points of contact for the whole array of software questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us directly on that subject, as well as the social media links Allison listed earlier.
Yeah, so we'll run through those real quick. I don't know if you want to talk real quick about the vendor coverage.
Absolutely. So when we look at the vendor coverage, what you see here are a full array of vendor-centric coverage, which a number of you I know on the call subscribe to, as well as our benchmarks, and there's a number of changes coming in the benchmarks this year that we look forward to sharing with you on client calls. We're going to be expanding our coverage of these lines of business, so applications, software technology, and systems management, so stay tuned. The 1Q webinar is going to be one for the books. And then our business intelligence software vendor benchmark continues to grow. We're now at 31 vendors that in the fourth quarter benchmark, which is going to publish on Thursday. Okay. So, and then finally our buyer.
We'll have to fix that slide, Allison.
We will fix that slide. That's my fault.
Okay.
And then our buyer behavior reports by industry. That's at the bottom of the screen, really looking at what customers tell us about vendor preference and vendor choice around applications within industry segments.
All right, so with that, I'm going to wrap up. There's a couple things I want to let everybody on the line know about. As Elizabeth mentioned, BI being a huge part of this this market. So we are doing our BI webinar, similar to this one. Elizabeth will be running that on April 8th. So if you haven't gotten an invite, please go to our website, the WebEx website to register for that. And there's another webinar, as two of the analysts that are listed here. We're going to be launching a new format, an OpenStack roundtable, a roundtable featuring 4 of our senior analysts called Around the Data Center. It'll be a moderated webinar featuring Matt and Christian, as you see here, as well as Scott Dennehy and Patrick Heffernan from Services and the Telecom Practices. So we're going to be looking at 5 hot trends in IT. My favorite topic is which IT trend is going to be the next pets.com. So that's going to be on the 16th of April, so we do encourage everyone to log into that. Should be an interesting webinar, to say the least. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the webinar. So as we mentioned, here are all the social media links. So we do encourage everyone to join conversations on SlideShare, YouTube, as well as LinkedIn, and to follow the analysts on Twitter for what they are thinking about and seeing in their day-to-day lives as technology analysts. So we do encourage you to join us on the social media links. I'm going to keep the chat function open for another couple of minutes just in case there's any last-minute questions you want to send through, any requests for follow-ups. Many of you have asked me throughout the course of the webinar when we're getting the slides. Those will be sent out with the link to this recording as well by tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. And if you would like to share this with anyone in your organization, please do feel free to do so. So with that, I'm going to sign us off, and we look forward to speaking to you guys again for the BI webinar next week, as well as the next software webinar coming up in the next quarter.
Yep, July.
All right.
July.
So thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.